Hello, thank you for being here. I am Pablo Garcia, and this is the artist talk of the exhibition, The Enchanted Loom. This is an exhibition that was possible thanks to the Queen's Council on the Arts Award and York University. Um, well, I hope that you are healthy. I hope that your loved ones are healthy too, and I hope you get the vaccine soon. And in the meantime, well, we have to make these artist talks online. So, the enchanted loom is the name of the metaphor that Sir Charles Serrington, he was a British electrophysiologist that coined the term synapses. Um, and this is the metaphor that he used to explain the functioning of the brain. So he compared the brain with a jacquard loom. He was contemporary of the Spanish neuroscientist Ramon y Cajal, and both got the Nobel Award for their discoveries about the functioning of the nervous system. Um, the show is involving different narratives coming from different disciplines like history of science, science and culture, science and religion, philosophy of science, and well, why metaphors? Why I am so interested in metaphors in science? I teach a course of metaphors in science at SBA and at the Humanities and Science Department, and I became interested in metaphors and the use of metaphors in science when I was a PhD student at the Museum Cajal. I was doing my thesis with the histological slides and scientific drawings of Ramon y Cajal, and I had to read all his bibliography. In some way, we were doing like an update of all his discoveries and theories in the present and contemporary neuroscience. So I read almost all his bibliography, and I was shocked because I found so many metaphors in his writing, especially in those parts of the text in which he was proposing like a new theory or a new scientific method. He used to to write using metaphors, and I was not familiar with that at that time. Another interesting thing of his, I mean, I was not familiar with that when you compare it with contemporary science. They are still metaphors in contemporary science, but sometimes they are more difficult to recognize them. Another thing that caught my attention was that many of these metaphors were what I call naturalistic metaphors. So at that time, when Cajal was um, working, the classical metaphor about the human brain was the one of the telegraph. But according to Cajal, this was not a good metaphor in order to explain brain plasticity, the organicity of the brain, and how we learn and store information. Um, so he used to compare the brain with a garden. He used to compare neurons with plants, with trees, with flowers, also with different parts of animals. And that was also very shocking to me because I was very used to the kind of what I know mechanistic metaphors about the brain. The most um, the most common metaphor is the brain as a computer metaphor. And well, then I started to wonder how this was possible. And since then, I've been doing research about metaphors in the history of science, especially neuroscience, but also evolution. Of course, the metaphors from Charles Darwin too. And well, for those that are interested in metaphor, I want to recommend you a book by Johnson and Lakoff. It is called Metaphors We Live By. It was written in the 80s, and they say many interesting things about how metaphors are not just figures of speech, but especially figures of thinking. Um, so, of course, I had to read Kuhn, The Structure of Scientific Revolution. Borjani. Borjani was an Hungarian author that Kuhn read and used part of his framework theory in order to propose his theory of paradigms and how science evolves through periods of scientific revolution, and in between there are periods that he called normal science. What is interesting is that after the publication of this book, The Structure of Scientific Revolution, there were many authors, especially historians of science, um, um, people from cultural studies, philosophers of science, and also some postmodernist authors that started to study metaphors and which was the role of metaphors in scientific thinking. And one of the things that I think that they got it right is that they challenged the vision that we had about subjectivity and objectivity in science, and especially that idea of neutral objectivity. So for many years, we have had the vision of scientists like people that are a little bit isolated from society, that they are like in their ivory tower, and just using reason and the scientific method, that by the way, who knows what the scientific method is? Because at the end, it's not just like there is just one method or way to approach of doing science. But anyway, um, so they challenge this vision of scientists just as people using objectivity and reason in order to make their discoveries. And we can see from these papers, from many of these papers, from historians of science and philosophers of science and postmodern authors, we can see how um, language was so important in for scientists. Of course, you scientists need to describe the reality of their study, their object of study, and in order to do that, they need to use language. And I don't know, guys, if you have made the experiment, but it's really difficult to make a statement that is completely true outside of context. Most of our language needs to be contextualized in order to make sense of it. In that way, I think that metaphors have become a powerful tool for make this kind of research and understand the way scientists used to think, to understand culture and the culture that they were exposed to and the culture that they were living. And another interesting thing is that many times the scientific theories and some of these metaphors, they become popular, they become extended to culture through scientific papers, but especially journalists and people that popularize science, and they stretch these metaphors, and well, sometimes it can be dangerous, and we have to be very careful about that because, well, even if sometimes or many times metaphorical thinking and analogical thinking was responsible or was useful for inspiration for scientists, and then they created theories that now we consider that are correct or closer to truth. Um, Sometimes metaphors and analogies were the problem of a scientific theory. Analogical thinking does not always work. It needs to be supported by data. The good thing about scientists like Cajal or Darwin is that even if they are inspired by metaphors, they were always trying to support all these theories with their data, collecting a lot of data. Sometimes, however, there are other scientists, and sometimes they could be also Darwin, Cajal, or very big scientists. They make mistakes and they create theories that sound scientific, that are based on an analogy, are based on a metaphor, and it looks like logic, but they are not true. They are not supported by data. And I think this is the problem behind some of the pseudoscientific theories that we can study in history, like, for instance, social Darwinism, phrenology, physiognomica, eugenics. I think there are many interests, political interest, economical interest, and sometimes misinterpretation of all these metaphors and manipulation of language to elaborate theories that look scientific and they are not, and that many times is based on this kind of metaphorical, analogical thinking, uh, and um, and saying things that look logic, but there are always fallacies in that kind of reasoning. Um, it is still something that is still happening. Fernando Vidal and also Susan Anker and Frazzetto, they talk about brainhood. Brainhood is the theory that we are our brain instead of we have our brain. Right? And in some way, that theory that is very defended by many neuroscientists, probably because it's the best way to collect funding, no? To put all kind of things inside of the brain, cultural things inside of the brain. Our ability to love is depending on an area of the brain. Our ability to experience God is depending in another area of the brain. Well, all this kind of thinking is has implication in psychology and education, and and it's creating tension with social sciences because at the end there can be people from humanities, from philosophy and so on that they, well, I don't have a field, everything can be done, or neuroscience could ramify so much that instead of philosophy we get neurophilosophy, and knowledge that is not considered scientific or that is not scientific is not considered knowledge anymore. This is a very complex problem. I am sure that you can find a lot of information online about this, but I think that language plays a very important role when we are talking about all these theories. Um, So I want to show you a video of the installation. I mean, a video of the exhibition for those of you that couldn't come. Um, another thing I want to say is that I think a lot about these theories related with science, related with language, related with philosophy of science. When I am preparing my classes, and also when I am going to the studio, or when I am coming back home. When I usually take the bus, so I used to think a lot about these kind of things. When I am in the studio, I try not to think too much about these things, but sometimes, of course, I have some ideas coming to my mind, but I try not to think too much. I try to think more about technical solutions for the artwork, things related with competition, with composition, or things related with um, trying to create new methods or new textures in my sculptures. Um, but when I am preparing my classes or when I am outside of the studio, I like to make these kind of connections. In the studio, again, probably I try to escape from this kind of intellectual framework. Although sometimes you can see that kind of theories or just a sublimation of that theory in the artwork. So let me show you the video. Okay. Um, So, and here it is. One second. Okay, so as you can see, it is an exhibition in which I play mostly with natural silk fibers as an analogy of the nerve fibers. Again, Cajal had a very, I don't like it very much, this metaphor. I think it's very cheesy, but he said, or he referred to the neurons as the butterflies of the soul. Before Cajal, I think it was in the 16th century, one disciple of Vesalius, Arancius, Julius Caesar Arancius, compared the hippocampus, the area of learning and memory, with a silkworm too. So that is a little bit of the connection. And since when, how did I start working with natural silk? And now let me show you the enchanted loom. This is the enchanted loom. As you can see, it looks like a very complex machine. And what is interesting is that it was a machine operated with these punch cards that contains patterns of holes, and depending on this pattern, the machine will create a different pattern on the fabric. Um, what is interesting, or what did capture my attention, is that this is the first or one of the first computational metaphors about the brain, because in fact, this is like the technology of the old computers. Based on this Jacquard loom, I think Charles Babbage created his analytical engine, and also there were cybernetics that created the first computers. Some of them were trying to create like a sort of mechanical brain. I don't remember the name right now, but there is one guy that tried to create like a mechanical brain. And so this is the origin of the, or one of the first origins of the brain computer metaphor. Um, of course, the brain computer metaphor has been so useful for the development of technology. And well, if you develop technology, then that is also, of course, very positive for the development of modern neuroscience. But several authors complain that this metaphor is hiding very important aspects of the brain functioning, also not just other properties, but also things about the function from analogical, digital. Well, that is a little bit complicated, but especially, well, we just have to think about properties like feelings, emotions, consciousness, metaphysical questions, evolutionary origin, of course, free will, no? If we are programmed, or if we are free, if we are programmed by nature and also by, well, let's say all kind of propaganda or education, but also if we, or if we are, if we can decide something, if it's just everything biological predetermined, you know? So this is, I think, a very big problem that I can see in science today, in all kinds of science, but especially the ones that are making science about living beings, like neuroscience or biology. I think that is creating a standardization, and it transforms nature to become more homogenic because of the kind of knowledge that is scientific knowledge. Scientists try to create universal theories, not just a theory about a specific individual or a specific um, animal. They try to create more general theories. And in this process, I think we can lose a little bit of our uniqueness and a little bit of our variability. Another problem with science when it is applied to living beings is that, especially with humans, some of these theories that are extended into popular culture, they can create trends in society. And at the end, this theory is that at the beginning, perhaps they could be a more or less good description of how we are as living beings. It becomes much more real because it creates like an imitation pattern. There are certain scientific theories that create trends in society, and we imitate that kind of theory. There is like an imitation pattern, and that theory become more reinforced. Well, this can be described also in terms of paradigms of circular thinking. Sometimes the premises become the conclusions, other times the conclusions become the premises. There is a great sentence to illustrate this circular thinking is something like, what color is the white horse of George Washington? And that in Spain we have the same sentence but applied to a saint, Saint James, and it is, ¿de qué color es el caballo blanco de Santiago? Well, questions that in the question you can find the answer, and at the same time, well, you don't have to think too much, but is um, the way I see sometimes how not just science, but every system of knowledge works, like reinforcing the premises that you have in the questions that you want to explore. So, because of that, I think we are losing a little bit of spontaneity, a little bit of variability. Of course, we need to think about, especially since the Enlightenment, reason, science, and technology have become like a moral view of the world too. And there are many theories from psychology, neuroscience, that in some way they are substituting all the morality that was coming from from religion, sorry, and they have become like the new morality. And I think they are removing part of the spontaneity and part of the variability of living beings. I'm gonna tell you another thing very interesting about the brain-computer metaphor, and is that there was one of the first ecologists, Arthur Tansley. He translated this metaphor um, of the brain as a computer. He transformed it into and translated into nature. Of course, have been many philosophers from Descartes to Lamettrie, Hobbes, that used to create mechanical analogies between living beings and machines. You can think about the model of the automaton too. But um, but this guy, Arthur Tansley, he translated this metaphor of the brain as a computer into nature. So for him, the ecosystem was mechanical, or ecosystem could be described in mechanistic terms, and they were always in balance, and they were stabilized through feedback loops. That was, of course, also the beginning of cybernetics. Um, After Tansley, and after this generation of cybernetic ecologists, There was a new generation of ecologists that were raised and educated under this model, and then they started to compare the data that they could obtain from these computational models. They compared those data with what was happening in real nature, and, and they discovered that it was not real, that dream of the machine, that thing like nature is so mechanical and is always in balance. They realized that ecosystems were very dynamic, that they were not in balance, they were not in equilibrium, or that this equilibrium was constantly changing. Adam Curtis is a filmmaker. He is becoming very famous, and he made this documentary that is called All Watched Over by Machines of Loving Grace. I recommend you guys to watch the second chapter because he's talking about all these things. And according to him, these ideas of stability and equilibrium in nature were used by mainstream power in order to create a vision of society in which everything should be in balance. You should know your place in the society, and don't think about yourself as an individual because you are part of a bigger system that is always in balance, and you should not rebel against this equilibrium. This is Adam Curtis, okay? Um, and I recommend you to watch that documentary. And let me show you a very interesting, very beautiful poem that could be considered a cybernetic poem. And okay, from correct. Okay, let me find it in YouTube. One second. Richard Broughton. All, all watched over. Okay, this one. So this is a poem that in some way I think describes so well the interaction between I like to think, and the sooner the better, of a cybernetic meadow where mammals and computers live together in mutually programming harmony like pure water touching clear sky. I like to think, right now please, of a cybernetic forest filled with pines and electronics, where deer stroll peacefully past computers as if they were flowers with spinning blossoms. I like to think, it has to be, of a cybernetic ecology where we are free of our labors and joined back to nature, returned to our mammal brothers and sisters, and all watched over by machines of loving grace. Okay, so about the system that now is a system created between um, ecosystem in between nature and machines, and how well these models created by machines, they are just models that in some way normalize nature, and nature loses a little bit of his spontaneity and what makes nature the real thing. Okay, let me show you now some of the works that we have in the exhibition. Okay, so this is or these are works based on anatomy. Okay, I admire the work of all anatomists like Vesalius, like Da Vinci. I always wonder how it's possible that some of these anatomies that they were so good at drawing got some of the morphological features so right, while others, the drawing is beautiful too, but the thing that is important is not present. Sometimes they thought that they were imperfection of the fixation method or the staining method, no? But yes, basically the work of especially microanatomy, microneuroanatomy is just following paths of fibers and see where do they start and where they are connecting and all these things. Well, as you can see in this artwork, um, I think, I hope you can see that there is also like a religious vibe going on or a spiritual vibe. This is, by the way, the biggest size I can print them now. I think this is 40 or 50 by 80 or something like that. So yes, there is this spiritual, religious vibe, probably because of symmetry too. I have been using religion as a source of inspiration in the past. It, and I have a very ambivalent relationship with religion. In some way, I like to remember, for instance, in the case of scientists that were believers like Darwin, um, well, God had a very important role in his theory. In some way, I think that it was the obstacle that was guiding his theory. And at the end, you can see that a little bit like the romantics, no? God in nature. Um, in the case of Cajal, he was also a believer, although he was critical with the Catholic Church. And but you can also see a sort of shift of God into the nervous system. Let's say that through hard work, intellectual engagement, being very focused, being isolated because microscopy, and especially before, in which there were not this kind of very big science group, it was just himself. He was very isolated. I like to think sometimes about him like in mystical terms. Of course, not because I think that there is a God. I am an atheist, but in terms of altered states of knowledge, altered states of mind. Uh, well, in this series of bas reliefs, perhaps you can see this. Uh, this is more like a religious work. This is Saint Teresa during the ecstasies, um, her union with God. That for her and her writings, because she was a poet, very wonderful poetry. She wrote wonderful poetry, and in her poets, you can see that the union was physical. It was not just metaphorical, spiritual. And the position of the body is very interesting. We will talk later about this. Well, there are many sculptures that portray the figure in this position. It is called the Arc of Hysteria. Louis Bourgeois has a very famous artwork about the art of hysteria, the Arc of Hysteria. On the background, you can see different ornamentations, but also angels and all these organic things that you can see here. They are brains in different states of development and different and brains from different animals. I work with the fibers also with an iron hair, so I create textures in the silk. Um, This is one of my first. Well, let me conclude about some of the thoughts about this relationship with religion. So, as I was telling you, I have this ambivalent relationship with religion in my work. Um, Previous, I have works in which you can see a sort of negative thing going on. Of course, I don't like well, I have a negative vision of national Catholicism and Franquism in Spain. Something that is still going on, especially in education. But at the same time, being here in New York, it's like I got more in contact with my culture. Um, and I learned to appreciate the Baroque and the historical art that we have in Spain. Also, in some way, I tried to juxtapose religion to science because, well, there are some scientists, in this case, I'm talking about Richard Dawkins, that is attacking religious and religion all the time. And I am sympathetic with him about that. He can make funny jokes about it. But, well, his vision is very simplistic. And so his vision about what faith is and what religion is. And the crazy thing is that in some way, he's asking people that have this kind of faith in different religions to abandon religion and to embrace science. And be careful because the kind of science that Richard Dawkins proposed is also very dogmatic. So I don't agree with him and with other authors coming from science and criticizing religions. I understand. I completely agree with them that sometimes religious, of course, has been a break for the advancement of scientific knowledge. But well, that's history, right? Um, Another interesting thing about religion and science, and a philosopher of science, Paul Feyerabend, contemporary of Kuhn, he also wrote very interesting things about the limits of science and religion, and how, in some ways, science was becoming a new religion. Some or many theories are more like a question of faith rather than demonstration, and especially about scientism. No, this belief that the only possible knowledge that we can have is when it's scientific knowledge, and that again creates a lot of tension with social sciences. Um, so here you have one of the first bas reliefs that I created. It's called the root, and it is inspired in. It's very Darwinian. This one, this work. As you can see, you have two groups of deers, and that they are competing for the goddess of nature. I think the Greek goddess of nature is Artemis. But there are fibers, trees, neurons, ornaments growing in all directions. No, it's very rich. It's a very rich landscape. Well, guys, I want to share with you a very interesting theory that I think is useful to understand this metaphorical thinking in science. So, as you know, Darwin based his theory of evolution in the Malthusian metaphor from economics. When populations grow geometrically and food or resources only grow arithmetically, there will be a struggle for existence and so on. But of course, he also used the metaphor of animals under domestication because for several hundreds of years, humans have been selecting animals and plants, the best ones, for the next generation and the next generation. So that process of selection has been happening through humans. So I think those two metaphors, the entanglement too, were useful to create his theories. And now I want to tell you how this theory was translated into neuroscience. So Cajal was, of course, he read Darwin, and he studied brains of different animals, compared them. He also compared brains of different animals in different levels of development. But he also applied natural selection or something like natural selection into the formation of the neuronal circuits. So when you study neurons in the process of evolution, you can see that at the beginning, neurons are very amorphous. They have processes that they will become the future dendrites or axons, and they ramified in all directions. Well, each neuron is a little bit different, okay? But they used to have that kind of shape. When they grow, And when they start to establish connections with other neurons, and in that way they can be modulated by experience, especially, for instance, sensory experience, there is a process that happens that Cajal described with very Darwinian flavor as a process of construction and demolition. And he stated that only those processes that were able to make connection with their targets, they were going to survive. The rest will be reabsorbed and um, they will disappear. And in that way, only those processes, dendrites or axons that establish connections, they will survive and they will be reinforced by the experience. So when you are reading these paragraphs from Cajal, you can see how it is completely inspired in Darwin theory of evolution. No? The survival only of those fittest connections. At the same time, if you think about the symbol of evolution, the phylogenetic tree, and you take a neuron, especially those neurons that are more tree-shaped, like a Purkinje neuron, you can see the similarity between both. I am sure that he noticed that, and in fact, many scientists after Cajal, or well, I'm thinking about one scientist. I don't remember his name right now, but he wrote something like, well, the shape of a neuron is describes the history of his development, all the decisions that the neuron had to make in order to make connections and grow as a full neuronal tree. And that tree reflects the history of the development of that neuron. So very metaphorical, very analogical thinking, and or thinking based on analogy. Sorry, and there is more. Another neuroscientist, Gerald Edelman, he passed away some years ago. He was American. He also got the Nobel Award because his theory of clonal selection. This is a theory in immunology by which when there is an infection by a virus like coronavirus or by bacteria, these viruses they contain antigens in their surface. Those antigens are molecules that are going to activate an immune response. We are going to join only those antibodies that are specific for that antigen. And then those antibodies are like rescued, they multiply, and they are going to fight against the infection. The interesting thing is that there must be this specificity between the antigen and the antibody, and those are the clones of antibody that are going to be multiplied. So only those antibodies that have a region that is specific for the antigen will in some way survive, and they will become antibodies that we could use in the reinfection or later. Okay, so again, no, you have a theory coming from economy, translated into biology, translated into neuroscience, translated into immunology. Gerald Edelman later also amplified this neuron Darwinism from Cajal, and he made a much more mature theory about that is known as neuronal Darwinism. Um, and what is interesting that Darwin himself, as you know, the Darwinian theories, went back to economy and went back to politics through social Darwinism and free market and competition and all that. I took some an independent study with a teacher from Johns Hopkins, whose name is Daniel Tutts. He's a great guy, a historian of science, and he teaches at Johns Hopkins, and um, he wrote a lot about, especially about Ivan Pavlov, but also about Darwin. And he studied the impact of Darwin in the Soviet Union, and well, because of politics, Darwin was not very well accepted into the, because of socialism and communism. It was not very well accepted into the scientific theories of that time. But also, the Russian or the scientists from the Soviet Union, they have a complete different vision of nature, probably also influenced by politics, but they were exposed to ecosystems like the tundra the or other ecosystems in which um, the plants or the vegetables or the trees, they are not competing for the humanity or for the sunrise, because there is enough space for everyone. And they describe evolution more in terms of, of symbiosis. Darwin also included symbiosis as part of, as a possible mechanism of natural selection. But later on, it's true that um, Darwin ideas um, were manipulated a little bit, although some of those ideas are already in Darwin, to create all this thing of social Darwinism and more things. Okay, so let's move on. Uh, let's forget about. I think we don't forget about Darwin. Um, I have more works here that are these are more related perhaps with sci-fi. I also teach science and science fiction at the School of Visual Arts. And now I want to show you this video. This is a video. This is called the Dark Print Project, and I want to show you just a little bit of it. Okay, enough. As you can see, this is a video of a small tissue of brain that you can section. It's a very small tissue, piece of visual cortex here on the back of the head. And you can make very small and thin sections of this piece of tissue. And then you can make photographs with an electron microscopy, and then you can mount those photographs to create this 3D video. They are not my photographs. The photographs come from Virginia Garcia Marin, and I just made the video, and I also um, um, display um, images of Goya's war disaster. I mixed this video in which you can see so many morphological features, synapses, mitochondria, dendrites, nucleus. Well, it's great to study for studying a structure. In fact, this is the kind of technology that the two main initiatives right now that they make big research about the human brain, research that could be analogous to the Human Genome Project. Well, they use these technologies. These are the Brain Initiative here in the US and the Blue Brain Project in Europe. So, as I was telling you, I decided to mix it with Goya's war disaster. Well, the message is very clear, no? Um, I am concerned, and many other people are concerned about the possible use of new neurotechnologies for dark purpose, what some people called the dual use of these neurotechnologies for civilian or for military, but also for positive or for negative things. This is very difficult to judge because, as you know, morality changes, and then in the future, perhaps we see this in a positive thing or as a negative thing. But some of these newer technologies, for instance, um, mm, brain computer interfaces that will help, for instance, people that they have a prosthetic limb, they can help to move that prosthetic limb. They are now trying to erase memories that could be useful for treating PTSD, but at the same time, um, it's not so easy to remove memories and not so ethical because you are sending people to war. They experience all the drama and all the negativity of this war, and then you erase the memory. That's a way of creating super soldiers, and not just super soldiers, but veterans that perhaps they will never complain about war anymore because they are forgetting about this war. Of course, these technologies can be used also for brain control, mind control, brainwashing, or drone bombing, drone bombing controlled by consciousness. There are other scientists that are interested in the idea of mind uploading. This is not just science fiction. Well, there are TV shows like Black Mirror and many other movies that deal with this thing of mind uploading. Um, I think it's a very futuristic application. I think it's not possible right now or in the following 60 years or something like that. But it's a win-win business, okay? Because well, who is going to complain once you are dead? Who is going to complain that you were not uploaded? Because some of these scientists are selling this mind uploading thing as the receipt for immortality, and in fact, they are competing with cryonics in order to say, okay, look, cryonics, you cannot trust cryonics because there is a process of freezing, and then through that process, proteins become denaturalized, and then you cannot reactivate that. With mind uploading, through this technique of creating a map of your brain, uploading that map into a computer, and then uploading also this into a prosthetic body, this is something that could be possible. That is their idea. Those are the ideas. There are many other people, and I am one of them, that I don't think this will be possible. I think they are making some fallacies, some mistakes, probably because of economic interests, perhaps also because of lack of complexity. I don't know. But for instance, they usually use the cybernetic fallacy. Some people think that if you have a lot of information, all the data that you need, you can create a model that in silicon that will become like you. I don't think so. I think that the organic flesh, the organic matter, is very important, has different properties than silicon. Another mistake that they make, I think, I don't know if they are mistakes or they are just simplifying everything. So you can think about this as a possible opportunity for mind uploading. But another mistake that they make is that they consider that memory is stored in synapses. Well, that is one part of the problem. Is stored in synapses, but also in the nucleus. The nucleus is also involved in memory processing inside of the neurons. There are temporal patterns of activation of neurons that are very important for learning and memory. And when you only have a photograph, because at the end with this kind of technique, you have to fix the brain and you only have a time frame of a very dynamic process that is the functioning of the mind or of the brain. So, and another mistake that they make is that they consider that the brain is the self, and many other people don't think, in fact, the body. No, they usually get rid of the body. They forget about the body, and not just the body, but well, you can think also about the social context. That is also so important for the self. So anyway, I am going to upload at the end a video of one of the scientists that believes in mind uploading, that believes that this is going to be a possibility in the near future. One thing that you should know is that there was a company that was promoting mind uploading. They were promoting mind uploading with terminal patients, because this is the real risk. Okay, that is this is where you can see the strategy. And they were collaborating with MIT. MIT, I think it was 2 years ago, decided no, we don't want to collaborate with you. I don't think your your interests are possible to. I don't think it is very ethical what you are doing, and and they decided not to collaborate with them anymore. Okay. Um, Another thing that Carla, sorry, my daughter is Carla. Please, please, I'm giving a presentation. Carla, I'm giving a presentation. Okay. So another thing. Thank you. So another thing that um, another concern that I have is that these two initiatives that I told you about, the Brain Initiative and the Blue Brain Project, they receive a lot of funding from the private sector, but a lot of funding from the public sector. And also they receive, in the case of the Brain Initiative, money from DARPA, from, let's say, the military complex. Um, they always say, no, we are going to cure all mental diseases. We are going to eradicate mental diseases. PTSD is like the magic word for them. And my concern is that this money from taxes, this public money, could be used to develop these technologies, to develop these startup companies, and then in the future you will have to pay for them again. And if you suffer a stroke, perhaps you had contributed with your money to the research about neurochips or whatever, and then you don't have the option to get this neurochip, so, or Neuralink or whatever. So I think it's a little bit obscure the way the funding works in science, especially in Europe. The scientific the science responsibles of this initiative, the science director, he sought out this project to the European Union as a way. Well, look, we are gonna create a lot of jobs. We are gonna develop industry, and this is something good for the economy. So, well, there are several reasons why politicians and scientists decide to fund one research instead of other research. Um, of course, I am mostly telling you some negative things about um, or possible negative things that can happen with these neurotechnologies. But well, they could be these computer brain models could be very very useful, for instance, for the pharmaceutical industry. Some people say also that it could be very useful to have this model, so in that way you don't have to use animals anymore. I don't think that will be possible, but well, there are of course many positive things that will come from these technologies. But well, um, is this the next Manhattan Project? Who knows? Um, so, and another thing that I wanna why I am a little bit paranoid about this is because when you study history of science, you realize how many science disciplines developed thanks to the support of the governments, thanks to the support of the CIA, thanks to the support of the military complex. In fact, they were part of the military complex. During the 60s, the 70s, many behavioral psychology labs developed, and they were funded by the CIA, and sometimes doing research that could be considered very unethical. So these kind of unethical things in science have passed, well, unethical from our own perspective today, but this kind of, yes, unethical, even experiments have been done in the past. So I was thinking a lot about these kind of things, trying to develop imagery for these projects, and I got a residency, an art residency in Gutenberg Arts. Gutenberg Arts is a print shop in New Jersey, in the town of Gutenberg, and they have great facilities. They are also very cool people. I recommend you guys to go there. And um, and well, I was thinking about images of war, helicopters, bombs droning, and and um, and I was trying to develop a printmaking project about this, but I run some tests and they didn't work. So then I decided to use some old prints that I had, some parts of my some material that I have some from my sculptures, and also different fibers that I had dyed with different colors, and I created this small collection of prints in which the main image is from a patient from an asylum, that they were diagnosed with different types of mental illness at that moment. I took some images from the novel iconography of the Salpêtrière, images belonging to Charcot's patient and his uh, patients, especially patients that were diagnosed as with hysteria. As you know, this hysteria diagnosis, there have been several authors after Charcot that have complained, well, why hysteria was just only diagnosed to women. That is not true. In fact, Charcot himself diagnosed also hysteria in men, although yes, it is true that it was considered more like a feminine disease. But Charcot diagnosed also hysteria in men, and during that time, hysteria was more associated with with war psychosis like cell shock and the later PTSD. One interesting thing that happened when I was studying these images of patients, where I have patients from the iconography of La Salpêtrière, but also the first kid that suffered a lobotomy here in the US by Walter Freeman. There are also images of patients with electroshocks. But one thing that captured my attention when I was studying the images from Charcot is that many of them had a sort of religious vibe, spiritual vibe. Later, I read that Charcot used to have like a notebook in which he used to had images from art history, and also in the next page, he used to have images of his patients. And in some way, I don't know if there was some kind of transference from the doctor to the patients, because everything was very theatrical, and I don't know if this some of these women took some of this gesture and expressions from the paintings, and you can see that kind of religious expression in their faces. Then I also read that Charcot, he wanted to secularize medicine. At that time, there were many nurses that were also nuns. He had a negative vision of religion. And in fact, he used to think about religious behaviors, religious manifestation, especially in the case of ecstasies, like the ecstasies of Saint Teresa that I told you before, like pathological states of hysteria. Well, many authors don't agree with this diagnosis a posteriori. There is a very famous sociologist of science whose name is Bruno Latour, that he has a great sentence that he used to say something like Tutankhamun. Well, scientists found that the lungs of Tutankhamun or the mummy of Tutankhamun had traces of the cock bacillus, the one that causes tuberculosis. And then he got this sentence that is like, Tutankhamun never died of tuberculosis because that will be an anachronism. And it is very interesting because during the science war, many scientists complain about this sentence and other close to postmodernist visions of science because they were saying, well, you are rejecting reality, you are neglecting the existence of our reality. But that is not the case. He's just um, getting the emphasis that a disease is not just the physical disease, but also there is a social-cultural dimension in that disease. And in fact, it needs to be diagnosed. If not, it's not it's not a disease. Think also perhaps about more severe illnesses that we have today or in during the 19th, like AIDS. Well, the diagnosis is very important in order to understand the disease from a sociological dimension. In the case of mental illness, well, this should be even more important because human suffering, at least psychologists say that human suffering mutates through time and through adapting to the different cultures and adapting to different cultures in time. And that's why now we have diseases that we didn't have before, like ADHD. And for instance, some diseases are not considered diseases anymore, like homosexuality was considered a disease by the DSM-3 until, well, until the 70s or something like that. So this is constantly changing. And however, you still have some people writing about, and this is very interesting because many times they write about artists without never treating the patient, without never treating the artist, just because of some symptoms. And well, Van Gogh probably had suffered all kind of mental diseases. He was he was a very very troublesome guy. Pollock the same. Jesus Christ suffered from ADHD. No, this is the kind of thing that is, I don't know. I don't understand it very well. Um, and And well, now another interesting thing about our connection that I wanted to make with hysteria is that, as you know, Spain is a very Catholic country, and there is a region in the northwest of Spain. It is called Ocorpino, and you can go to this town, and there's a church, and they still make exorcisms. They don't say it in public because before some of these exorcisms used to be in public. Sometimes it was in private, but sometimes it was also like a group exorcisms, and they still do them, although well, mostly in secret. Uh, but it is very interesting because there are images of these ceremonies, and you can see people that probably if a therapist talks with them and try to establish a diagnosis, although uh, they could be diagnosed as, well, not hysteric, that because not hysteria because that is not used anymore. Today is known as conversion disorder, also dissociative disorder. So, so many of the people that are um, that try to get this devil out of their bodies and to experience this exorcism, mm, let's say they were not, or a therapist could say that they were not very imbalanced. And in fact, some of them have a lot of tics and physical tics. Sometimes it could be, of course, an organic and a neurological disease, um, instead of just a possible case of hysteria that is organic symptoms that they don't have an organic origin. And people can experience uh, paralysis, spasms, blindness, numbness, and so on, but there is not an organic cause for that. I have some videos at the end about Ocorpino and also videos from um, Sergio De Martino or Ernesto De Martino. He was an Italian filmmaker, and he used to record cases of tarantism in the Basilicata and La Puglia. Tarantism was a sort of disease that was supposed to be caused by the bite of the tarantula, and the remedy for that disease was supposed to be dancing. But while they are dancing and they enter into a sort of trance, you can see that many of the gestures that they have, they are very similar to the gestures of patients with conversion disorder. And well, during history, there have been many cases of mass hysteria and many cases of, now mass hysteria is known as mass psychogenic illness, epidemics of love, epidemics of people that were dancing all the time. Happening. They have happened in Europe. I recommend you also to watch a great movie that is called The Devils by Kenneth Russell, and the set design is fantastic by Derek Charman. It is based on The Devils of Lodon by Aldous Huxley. So if you have the occasion, watch The Devils. About It's dealing about religious beliefs and mass hysteria. Okay, and just for finishing, I want to show you some sculptures that I made for the exhibition, in which I use color. I am dyeing the silk. I hope I could um, create more interesting combinations of color. I am experimenting more with color. Um, um, the title of this work is Destruction of the Stone of Madness After Bosque. Is based on this painting that is in the Prado Museum, in which there is a group of surgeons that are extracting the stone of madness from someone. They are lying to him, of course, and this is a critique to sometimes to neuroscience or to a biologicist approach about the human mind, in which there are people, especially coming from science, that believe that the behavior can only be explained in biological terms, and they are always finding for genes, neuronal circuits, and they never have in mind other cultural reasons. Like, for instance, this artwork is titled Weirds. Weirds is the acronym of Western individual that live in rich democratic societies. That is more or less around 1 or 2% of the population. The problem is that most of the studies that have been made with brain scan images, they have used this 1% of the population, because of course the systems of visualization, those scan machines are in these rich countries. So there are people that say that these studies can be biased, because we have seen studies in which you can see how people from different cultures process information, for instance, visual information, in different ways. So culture-wise, the brain. So well, perhaps we have a narrow vision of the human brain, because it's biased, and it's biased by also our own culture and the representation only of individuals from these cultures in these studies. And this is another artwork that, well, in many of the sculptures, I also use pieces of metal. In this one, you can you can see here there is like a cell shock. No, sorry, cell shock. Milking cell, vinyl. I use also barbecue spikes. This is a cake platform. In this one, there is a male chastity cage, steel crutches. I like to use silk a lot. I mean, steel. I like to work a lot with steel too. And well, we have arrived to the end. Here I just have some links to some interesting videos that you can find in YouTube. Links about mine uploading, Brain Blue Project, Ocorpino, Leroy. Leroy, what's Leroy? Leroy, I told you before a little bit about mass psychogenic illness. So this happened in like 2012, and it was in Leroy, upstate New York. There was a town in which, in a very small period of time, a group of 8 teenagers, all of them women, developed symptoms of um, Tourette syndrome. When the doctors examined them, they had tics and they had this kind of spasmodic movements. So the doctors examined them and they realized that, or they didn't find any kind of um, organic cause for this kind of tics, and they concluded that it was another case of mass psychogenic illness or mass hysteria. And well, I hope you. I know it was a little bit long, but I wanted to go slowly. I didn't want to run, and I hope you like the talk. And also, I hope you get the vaccine soon, and we can go outside and enjoy life again. Thank you. Take care.